Hi everybody and welcome. For today's video we're going to look at a minor piece ending study. What I would consider a practical chess endgame that you could easily imagine an ending like this occurring in one of your own games. So let's just take stock of the position. It's white to move and white has a passed pawn and it's knight versus bishop. The white king is in a very prominent position, and obviously white's got this passed pawn that's just two squares away from queening. Black has a bishop, but it's currently not very well placed. It's sitting right in the corner, where which is the least active square for a bishop. Bishops operate best from one of the two central squares that it can control. And this pawn is currently under attack, so white has to do something just to avoid losing the pawn outright. And I'd like you to just look at this position with an open mind and try to determine what the outcome of the game should be with the most accurate play from each side. And you should begin by just examining the various moves available to white. Um, Obviously white wants to try to win and queen this pawn, and black wants to exchange off his bishop for this pawn so that neither side would have winning material, mating material, and would have a draw. So I'm just going to give you some time here to think this through. Please go ahead and pause the video and then resume when you're ready to hear my discussion of the solution. Okay, well, let's just begin by identifying some candidate moves. Obviously the pawn move d7 prevents immediate capture by the king, so that should be looked at. And then there's a couple of checks. There is knight f7 check, knight f3 check, and then there's the idea of knight e4, which also defends this pawn. And then you've got some interesting king moves like king to e7 and king to d7 that also should also be analyzed. Let's start out with the most obvious move in the position, and that's d7. So d7, white's just pushing that pawn away from the black king and preparing to queen it on the next move. However, there's a very clear-cut problem, and I hope you saw this, that black can simply play his bishop to the c6 square, controlling this important diagonal and pinning the pawn on d7, which is now impossible to push because it would be revealing a check against the white king. No matter what white does here, black is going to be able to capture this pawn and the game will be drawn. So actually the only reasonable attempt here is knight to f3. And if black was foolish enough to capture this knight with the pawn with his bishop, the pawn would come to d8 and queen, and white would win the game. However, all black needs to do is to keep his king on the dark squares, and now no matter what white does on his next move, this pawn on d7 is going to be captured and the game will be drawn. So let's just spin back to the starting position. So we've identified that d7 doesn't work. What about knight to f7? Hopefully you looked at this too. After knight to f7, king to d5, and after king to d5 and king to e7, black just brings this bishop to c6. So this is a thematic idea where black once again is taking control of this d7 square, which is part of the pawn's path to becoming a queen. So white can try stuff like knight to d8, but provided that the bishop maintains control of d7 from either a4 or b5, black will easily hold this ending and I hope you can are satisfied that there's no way for white to make any progress here. Another try worth looking at, knight to e4, indirectly just controlling the square, but white can just give up. Black can just give up the bishop here by capturing, and after d7 the bishop just comes back to c6, pinning again. So it's this common motif of pinning in this ending, and when you're calculating variations like this, one of the things that gets tricky is that you see the same ideas in different sub-variations, and it's all too easy to get confused about which ones you've looked at and which ones you haven't. So it's important to be fairly systematic about it. What about knight to okay, so sorry, we looked at knight f7 and knight e4, and so the other two attempts are king to e7, king to d7. So king to e7 actually seems like the more logical try, because king to d7 impedes the progress of the pawn. You'd be blocking your own pawn's progress. However, this is not the right way to do it, because black once again has control of the c6 square, and similar to the other themes, there's no way for black to successfully get this bishop off the diagonal now, and the game is drawn. So one variation might look like this: knight to f3 check, and king to d5, knight to h4, king to e4. We can just repeat moves, and there's really no way for white to make any progress. So I hope you'd found king d7. I did find it myself after 2 or 3 minutes of analysis, but it was one of the last moves I looked at because it just seems counterintuitive, blocking your own pawn. But the main strategic advantage of this move is it prevents the bishop coming to c6. So once you've seen that the bishop on c6 is a problem for white, look for ways to prevent that, and king d7 is the only move that really restricts the ability of the bishop to come to this square. However, it's not as simple as this. King d7 is the right start move, but it's not over yet. So king to d5, and now black is threatening to come to the c6 with check. But white can play king to c7. The bishop comes to c6, and it appears like black has got the ideal setup now. And this would be true, apart from there's a very beautiful tactical idea here based on Zugzwang. So white has knight to e4 here, and this is the idea that black is now compelled to move, and if the king moves, the bishop will be lost and the pawn is going to queen. So for instance, king takes e4, king takes c6, king e5, d7, and the pawn is going to queen. So we really don't want to move the king, and there are no good squares for the bishop, unfortunately. For instance, after king e8 we've got knight f6, forking the bishop and king and winning the game. Similarly, if bishop to b5 or bishop to a4, then the knight can fork on c3, also picking up the bishop and easily winning the game. And the bishop really doesn't want to go to a8. That's the only square he can go to where he's not subject to some kind of fork trick. But after this, white just plays d7, and the knight is lost, but it doesn't matter because white queens now and the game is over. Well, that concludes today's video. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you next time on YouTube. Take care.